I'm here today to present on a project that I've been working on at Oregon State University called a Blossom and Rot Toolkit for dry farm tomatoes. This project is funded by Western SARE. We just completed our first year of research. Project partners at the university include Tegan Moran, who's here right now, Lane Selman, who'll be presenting next about marketing, and then Jim Myers is the PI on the project. And this project is about creating a suite of tools that farmers can use to control blossom end rot for dry farm tomatoes. Oh, wrong button. So I'm going to start off with some things that you should know about blossom end rot, and this might get a little controversial, so hang with me, and we can always discuss any sort of controversial stuff at the very end. So the first thing that I feel like everyone needs to know and understand is that blossom end rot is a physiological disorder. It's not a disease. It is a problem of the physiology of the plant. It is associated with drought stress, and it makes the fruit unmarketable. You know, you can get a little bit of light blossom end rot, like Joe was talking about, and that can give you maybe that fruit could be sold as a second, or maybe you could even sell it as a first. However, it can also get really bad and make the fruit completely unmarketable, like Joe was saying. The second thing you should know is that blossom end rot is a major issue for dry farm tomatoes. You know, dry farming is associated with lower yields and smaller fruit, but I think that the big issue that dry farmers run into with tomatoes is these physiological disorders, especially blossom end rot. So here in Western Oregon, we did a study in 2019, and we found that across 17 different farms, about 38% of the early girl tomatoes that were grown were affected with blossom end rot. And this ranged from 9% at one farm all the way up to 83%. So you can imagine when you get to that 83% of your tomatoes having blossom end rot, then that is a crop failure. And then the final thing, and this is the controversial one, is that there are actually two competing theories regarding the direct causes of blossom end rot. The first one, I'm sure you're all familiar with, is that it is the result of calcium deficiency, that either, there's not enough calcium in the soil, or the plants can't take the calcium up because there's not enough moisture in the soil, or there's too many other cations competing with uptake, like, potassium or ammonium, things like that. However, there's another theory as to what causes blossom end rot, and that is that it is the result of a sequence of luxurious, rapid early season growth, which predisposes the plants to blossom end rot, followed by severe stress. And it's the second theory that I've been really focused on in our research. And so the purpose of this project is to find effective controls for blossom end rot that work for dry farm tomatoes. I'm not interested in proving which of these two theories is more or less correct. I just want to find ways that farmers can actually control blossom end rot because it is a huge issue. And it's not the only physiological disorder that we struggle with. So here you can see some pictures of different physiological disorders of dry farm tomato. The top two on the left are blossom end rot, light and heavy. But then we also got sunburning on the top right. And we've got green shoulder or yellow shoulder, or sometimes called gold top, which are these bottom two left photos. And then on the bottom right, that is internal whitening, and all these things I think are associated with dry farming and potentially with drought stress. So we did studies that showed that that irrigated tomatoes get yellow shoulder at least less than dry farm tomatoes do. So what is the blossom end rot toolkit? Well, it is a suite of tools for controlling blossom end rot in dry farm tomatoes. And these tools are built on that hypothesis that it's stress rather than calcium deficiency that's responsible for blossom end rot. And the tools are, first, sheltering the tomatoes from the wind to reduce drought stress. The second is decreasing in-row spacing for tomatoes to reduce the early season growth that predisposes them to blossom end rot. The third tool is decreasing fertilizer applied to reduce early season growth. And then the fourth one, which we didn't successfully test this year in 2023, but we plan to test in 2024, is whether we can actually pre-drought stress the seedlings to activate drought stress memory. And this is something we find with plants generally is that once plants have experienced drought stress, they'll actually respond to it differently the second time. I don't know if this works But I'm excited to test it and see if we can control blossom end rot in the nursery production system. And then the final tool is grafting and variety selection. We've already have a lot of research that shows that tomato grafting onto certain rootstocks can reduce blossom end rot, and then certain varieties are more or less susceptible to blossom end rot, like Joe was just talking about with the Dirty Girl being less susceptible than the Early Girl. And so what led to these tools is actually a lot of these tools, we already have evidence that they work. In 2019, we conducted a site suitability study. 17 different farms participated. We found that sites that were sheltered from the wind by large trees or structures or buildings tended to have lower blossom end rot incidence. We also found that, and this was really interesting, as soil fertility on the farms increased, there tended to be more blossom end rot. And this actually included calcium. So we found that there was a relationship where the more calcium in the soil, the more blossom end rot there was. And I think that this might actually be because a lot of these nutrients they're correlated with each other. So sites that had really high calcium tended to have really high other nutrients. I don't think that the calcium per se was causing blossom end rot. It's the correlation, not causation kind of thing. And then the final thing we found was that decreasing in-row spacing also resulted in a 15% decrease in blossom end rot. In 2020, we did a soil management study, and we found that factors like allowing weeds to grow resulted in blossom end rot, but also increasing applications of compost, increasing applications of chicken manure, and using a leaf mulch all increased blossom end rot. And we think that the first one, the weeds, increased drought stress, and then the latter three, the compost, chicken manure, and leaf mulch, they all increased that early season growth. So they had lots of fruit, they grew really big, the tomatoes were all really small, and they had lots of blossom end rot. And I just said this, so yeah. Another thing, we tested gypsum as a soil amendment. We found that it had no effect on blossom end rot. And interestingly, the leaves of the weedy treatment had the highest calcium concentration of any of the treatments, though it was not statistically significant. And then finally, in 2021, we did a small study where we looked at tomatoes grown on the north and south side of corn. And we found that the tomatoes that were grown on the south side of corn that were protected from the wind had a third the blossom end rot as the tomatoes grown on the north side. And so we wrote a proposal based on all this evidence we found to kind of unify all of these, disparate findings into a single package called the Blossom End Rot Toolkit. And we just wrapped up our first year of the project. We did a trial at the OSU Vegetable Research Farm. And then we also did 5 on-farm trials testing 3 different rates of composted chicken manure application to try to find the optimum amount of fertility. The pictures are all jumping up at the wrong time, but so this is that OSU trial, and you can see we have our little corn plots planted amongst the tomatoes. And then finally, we had 6 farmers that independently trialed the Blossom End Rot Toolkit. They just picked certain tools they wanted to test, and they told us whether or not they worked. This is a picture of an on-farm trial, and this is the fertility, so different rates of composted chicken manure. And you can see here on the left is that 0 pounds of nitrogen per acre compared to 100 pounds on the right. So at some farms, there wasn't much of an effect of fertility, but this one was former pasture, and so there was a big effect. I'm just going to get a little bit into the treatments that we did. So these are those tomatoes grown on the south side of the corn. And we had anemometers to measure the wind. And you can see, so this is at the Vegetable Research Farm. Most of the wind came from the north. We had a little bit from the west and a little bit from the south. So we anticipate that the corn really only blocked the wind from the north. And then it was really interesting this year. I read a paper, I didn't find it, but someone shared it with me and I read it on that actually intercropping with corn is an ancient technique in Campania, Italy, for dry farm tomato production. So, I'm not just coming up with some sort of hippy dippy, intercropping idea. Apparently, it's an ancient technique. So there you go. So this is a demonstration of our density treatment. You can see for the density treatment, we planted the rows 9 feet apart, 20 inches in row spacing compared to our control, which was 6 feet between rows and 30 inches in row spacing. And this results in the same planting density of 15 square feet of plant. It's just slightly different, arrangement. We also tested trellising this year, and we anticipated that trellising would increase blossom end rot. by exposing the fruit to the wind, so elevating them. There's more wind higher up. We'll talk about whether or not we saw that result in just a sec. And then we did these fertilizer treatments where we put down different rates of Nutri-Rich, which is, I don't know if it's complete fertilizer, but it's at least has all NP and K. And we put this down at a rate of 0 pounds of nitrogen, 50 and 100 pounds of nitrogen per acre. So now we're going to get into our results from this first year. It does have calcium too. Thanks, Patrick. Yeah, it's like 7% calcium. So these are our results from this first year. You can see our treatments are in this column on the left. So we have no amendment, reduced amendment, and control. And then we have our density treatment, our sheltered treatment, and then our trellising treatment. So you can see that none of the treatments affected total yield. These letters indicate a statistically significant difference. So you can see that there was an effect on marketable yield, and the trellis treatment actually had the highest marketable yield. It was higher than the shelter, the control, and the no amendment treatments. You can also see that trellising resulted in larger fruit. So, about 1/4 of a pound compared to 2/10 of a pound. And then with blossom end rot, this is incredible. I was so surprised to see this result, but there was like hardly any blossom end rot at the OSU Vegetable Research Farm trial, and it kind of destroyed this experiment. So I was really hoping that I would get, at least 30% blossom end rot, but no. But there was still enough treatments that I could show a significant difference between the control, which had about 2.2% blossom end rot, and then the reduced amendment, which had 1% blossom end rot. Yellow shoulders, there was no effect of treatment on yellow shoulders, but there was an effect of treatment on sun scalding, with the trellis treatment having the least sun scalding, about 6%, and then the in-row spacing reduced where they're more tight together, about 9% sun scald. And I think that it's because there was better coverage of the fruit by the foliage, and that reduced the sunburning. And then finally, there was no effective treatment on soluble solid concentration. This is like the sweetness, how much sugar is in the fruit. And soluble solids were also really low. So it was really surprising this year to have very low blossom end rot, pretty large fruit on average, and then pretty low sugars. These almost were like, as Joe was saying, it was like they were acting like irrigated tomatoes. So big bummer. We're gonna have to fix that next year. We also had on-farm trials. So this is one of the on-farm trials in Philomath. You can see our anemometer, the wind meter. We can see our little weather station there, and then our tomatoes. And we got, again, 0 pounds per acre, 50 pounds of nitrogen per acre, and 100 pounds of nitrogen per acre. Our treatments. And this was at 5 different farms, I think. 5 or 6, I can't remember. Anyways, you can see that there isn't much of a treatment effect on total yield, though at certain farms, there was a really big effect of the treatment on total yield. And so, on the farms where there was very low inherent soil nutrients, there was a big effect. At farms where there was a, high amount of soil nutrients, there wasn't much of an effect on total yield. And there wasn't much of an effect on marketable yield, but you can see that there was an effect on average fruit weight as there's more nutrients applied, we're getting smaller fruit. There wasn't a statistically significant effect on blossom end rot, but you can see there's definitely a trend here with the no amendment treatment having about 25% blossom end rot on average compared to 42% for the control. And then there was an effect on yellow shoulders. So as the nutrients increased, soil nutrient applications increased, yellow shoulders decreased. Yellow shoulders has been associated with soil potassium concentrations, so that could be why. Then there was an effect on sun scalding, but there was an effect on the soluble solids concentration. So as the nutrients in the soil increased, as the application increased, the fruit got sweeter. And this is very different from the OSU Research Farm trials. We're getting more blossom end rot, we have sweeter fruit, and then they're also smaller. Remember, at OSU, the average fruit size was about 2/10 of a pound. So, these are acting more like, as Joe would say, like tomatoes that are being dry farmed. So in summary, sheltering, we believe it reduces blossom end rot. We didn't see that effect this year, but we anticipate we'll see it in future years. Planting at a tighter in-row spacing reduced sun scald incidence. and then decreasing applications of composted chicken manure, reduced blossom and rot, and increased average fruit weight, but it also increased yellow shoulder incidence and reduced fruit soluble solids concentration. And then finally, trellising increased marketable yields and average fruit weight and decreases sun scald. And we did not see an effect of trellising on blossom and rot, though I do anticipate that on certain farms we would have seen an effect. Now to talk a bit about year 2 and 3, we're going to be doing the interactions between these treatments. We're going to be doing this on farm, so hopefully I can get more blossom and rot. But this is an example of what I'm proposing for our trial. We'll have corn shelters as our main plot effect, and then different fertility and density treatments as the subplots within those main plots. And then I also want to do the container production and pre-drought stressing the seedlings trials. So that will be another part of next year's or 2024's growing season trials. So a big thank you to the project team, to my research assistants, to my frequent collaborators, and to the people who I stole my illustrations from. And with that, I am over time, so I'm really sorry about that.
Thank you, Matt. That's really great presentation.
Tegan, did you have any questions that you saw in the chat?
I think some of them have been addressed, but there's one which, what direction was everything planted?
Yeah, so I planted the tomato rows. They went for the OSU trial, they went east-west, so that I could plant the corn to the north. You look at the picture back here. So imagine that like these are the rows, or there's an even better picture right here. So this is looking east right here. And then our corn plots are to the north.